Good morning, Soul City Church. Good morning, good morning. If maybe you made your way into this room in the last 7 minutes or so, hi, my name is John, and I'm so excited to be diving in to this message. But before we kind of get there, you all were just having a little conversation around who the most impressive person that you can think of is. And you may have named someone that you know personally. What a compliment to them. Or maybe you named just someone that you don't know personally. Maybe it's someone who is famous. Like maybe for you, you named like a great athlete, right? Maybe you talked about the great Michael Jordan, the great Simone Biles, Serena Williams, Michael Phelps. Maybe you went a different route. You might have talked about a great musician or a great artist. When you talk about impressive, how can you not talk about Beyonce or Taylor Swift, Michael Jackson, the Beatles, right? Or maybe you went a slightly different route and you talked about someone who I would consider to be a multi-hyphenate. Someone who does so many things that they kind of defy categorization. I mean, Oprah, hello, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Governator, You could talk about Will Smith. How many times has Will Smith kind of shifted or changed the direction of his career? I don't know, maybe you even talked about pastors. Like maybe one pastor in particular that you just find to be so utterly impressive. No, you probably didn't. You probably didn't say that. But regardless of who you chose, whether it was someone you know or you chose a famous person, my guess is you probably chose somebody who has made or produced something of significance in this world. My guess is your answer probably revolved around a person who is impressive to you because of something that they've done. And what I think is really interesting is not only do we consider these people impressive because of what they've done or accomplished, but because of what they've done or accomplished, we also often consider these people to be more important, don't we? See, here's the truth, that we live in a world, and in a culture especially, that often is far more interested in what you've done or what you do than it is interested in who you are as a person. And if you don't believe me, I'll give you a little exercise. When you are done with this service and you go out in the lobby, you might meet somebody new. And after learning their name, I guarantee you one of the first questions you will ask them or they will ask you is, what do you do? And that will probably be the main point of the rest of your conversation. You think about in our culture the people who we consider to be successful online in the social media space. My guess is the influencers that you follow, their value in your life is directly correlated to things that they make or content that they produce. And now there's almost this promise that comes with the modern internet that says if you can make enough stuff, and if the stuff that you make is good enough, then you too can have an audience. You too can have influence. You too can matter. And so now we have a generation of people who walk around and see everything they do as content to be made, rather than experiences to have and people to be with. In our country, we now elect political leaders, not based on who they are, not based on their character or integrity, but based on what they do, what they make, or at least what they say they will do for us. And to be really clear, that is not just a comment about our most recent presidential election. This is true on both sides of the aisle, on every level of government. We place so much value on what people can make or produce in this world. And I'll say, there certainly are instances where this emphasis on what we make or do, it's appropriate at times. But I don't think it's controversial to say that we are in a world that places an overemphasis on what we do and produce. A culture that places value judgments on people, not based on who they are, but based on what they do. And in a world like that, how can we not eventually find ourselves asking the question, does what I make me matter? Does what I make, is that what ultimately makes me matter? Is my worth in this world defined by the work that I do? In relationship, is my value determined by how much value I can bring other people? Does the dollar amount in my bank account account for how much I count as a person? Does what I make me matter? I think these are questions that we ask ourselves. And for the last several weeks, if you've been here, we've been in this teaching series, Bless This Mess, which ultimately is all about our human tendency to give ourselves over to things that we often think will be best for us, but they actually only end up making a mess for us. And today, we're going to talk about the misguided human belief that we can work our way to worthiness in this world. This misguided human belief that if I just make more, then somehow I will matter more. And where we're headed, where we're going to go, where we're going to land, is we're going to discover that God has a beautiful truth to speak over that lie that many of us have come to believe. But before we get there, we're going to have to dive into the scriptures a little bit. So do me a favor, reach under the seat in front of you, I'm serious, or on your armrest, grab a Bible, open it up to Genesis chapter 29. It's on page 24 in the Soul City Bible. We're going to be spending some time there today. Genesis 29 on page 24. If you've been here, you know that each week in this series, we're looking at a different story from the life of the Old Testament character Jacob. And the last time we saw Jacob, he had deceived his father and stolen the blessing, the family blessing, from his brother. And so Jacob is actually going to spend this next season of his life sort of on the run from his family of origin. And so Jacob goes and he lives with his uncle Laban in a different country. And while he's living there, he falls in love with Laban's daughter, Rachel. Now, for those of you keeping score at home, you just heard what I said. He fell in love with his uncle's daughter. Isn't that his cousin? Yes, it is. This was common practice in the ancient world. And if that little fact weirds you out a little bit, that's totally okay. But I also feel like I need to tell you, buckle up, Buttercup. Because Genesis 29 is one of the craziest stories in the entire Bible. There is relationship drama in here that the producers of Love is Blind would salivate over. They wish they could come up with something this messy. And so pardon me while I spill some 4,000-year-old tea for you real quick. Is that okay? So Laban, Jacob's uncle, he actually has two daughters. He has an older daughter named Leah, and then he has his younger daughter, Rachel. And Jacob falls in love with Rachel. And so he works for many years to earn Rachel's hand in marriage. But on the night where they get married and they are supposed to consummate and seal their marriage, Laban sends Leah into Jacob's tent instead. And because it's so dark, because Jacob can't really see, and honestly, because he probably had a little too much fun at his own wedding, Jacob ends up sealing and consummating a marriage to Leah instead. Now, if you remember the story from last week, where Jacob tricked his father by pretending to be his brother, you might say that what goes around comes around, Jacob. However, Jacob is pretty upset about this, and so he confronts his uncle, and Uncle Laban says, "Don't worry about it, Jacob. You can still marry Rachel. You just got to work for another 7 years." And Jacob does. And so now Jacob is married to both of these women, one of whom he loves, one of whom he has no interest in, and to make matters worse, both of his wives are sisters. So the next time you want to complain that your family Thanksgiving is a little awkward, you just remember the mess that Jacob has gotten himself into. But here is where we're actually going to pick up. We're going to pick up in Genesis chapter 29, verse 31, where even in the midst of all of this relational mess, Jacob decides this is the perfect time to start a family. Genesis chapter 29, verse 31. When the Lord saw that Leah was not loved by Jacob, he enabled her to what? Conceive. But Rachel remained childless. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, for she said, "It is because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will what? Love me now. Verse 33, she conceived again. And when she gave birth to a son, she said, "Because the Lord heard that I am not loved by Jacob, he gave me this one too." So she named him Simeon. Again she conceived. And when she gave birth to a third son, she said, "Now at last my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons." So he was named Levi. So as much as Jacob is the central character in these chapters of Genesis, this week I actually want us to focus a little bit more on the character of Leah. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but Jacob is not the only character in these stories who is trying to go after or manufacture his own blessing. What we see here is that Leah is sort of going after or trying to get a blessing of her own. What does she want? She wants her husband, Jacob, to see her, to notice her, to love her. This is a reasonable desire. But for whatever reason, Jacob just doesn't. And the closest thing we get as to a reason is actually back in verse 17. These 2 sisters are described, and Rachel is described as being very beautiful, whereas the text describes Leah as having weak eyes, which just sounds like a really bad excuse that a guy would tell you when he's breaking up with you. What does that even mean? The traditional kind of interpretation of this is actually just simply that Rachel was more conventionally attractive and Leah was not. And that's why Jacob wasn't as interested in her. To which all of the women and all of the strong feminists in the room said, "Typical man. We can do better than this." But whatever the reason or reasons, Jacob, he just doesn't want anything to do with Leah. However, Leah is able to have children. And during this time, it was very important to be able to carry on your family line and family name. And so when Leah gives birth to her first son, she says something so interesting in verse 32. Did you see it? She gives birth to her first son, and the first thing she says is, "Surely my husband will love me now." And I don't know about you, but I think these are subtly some of the saddest and most poignant words in the whole Bible, because they are revealing something that is going on inside of Leah. They are revealing this narrative that she is building for herself that says, if I can make enough for Jacob, then I will matter to Jacob. If I can just give my husband enough children, surely my husband will love me now. If I can make enough heirs for him, surely my husband will love me now. And it makes me wonder for you and I how often our work in this world is in pursuit of our own surelys. Like maybe for you, you work your butt off at work. You work your butt off in your job, and every time you hand in a project, every time you make a sale, you tell yourself, surely my boss will value me now. Surely they'll see me. Or maybe you're the person who handles all of the plans with your family or friends. You schedule it, you communicate it, you coordinate it. You work so hard to make the things happen and make these memories for people, and every time you do, you tell yourself, surely they're going to appreciate me now. Or how about when we work our way to a new version of ourselves, new wardrobe, new body, and so we start to produce or make or post all of this content online to kind of show off this perfectly manicured 2.0 version of ourselves, and we're doing it because we tell ourselves, surely someone will want to be with me now. Surely someone will want me now that I've changed. I'll be pretty enough, skinny enough, good-looking enough. We even do this with God. I'm talking about when you show up to church for like the 4th week in a row, right? I'm talking about when you sign up for the table group, you sign up to serve on a team, you pray like on your own, not just when someone prays for you in the prayer hall. But if you're totally honest, you're not really doing it from a place of transformation and love for God. You're doing it because deep down you believe, if I just do enough good stuff, then surely God will forgive me for what I did. If I just show up to church enough, then surely that will make up for the mistakes that I've made. If I just do enough of the things that the people at Soul City tell me to do, then surely I will have earned God's love by now. You see, just like Leah, I think you and I, we believe this lie that if we can just make enough stuff in this world, then finally we will matter enough in this world. And while, like we talked about earlier, there are certainly many, many ways that our culture confirms that narrative, what I want you to know today, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is that God invites you and I into a completely different narrative than that. And it is a narrative that is actually hinted at right here in Leah's story. Did you notice, not verse 32, did you notice how verse 31 started? You might have missed it. It's easy to miss if you're not paying attention. That's often how God works in our lives. That's often how the truth of God or the presence of God shows up. It's easy to miss if you're not paying attention. In verse 31, it starts with when the who? When the Lord what? When the Lord saw that who? When the Lord saw that Leah. Verse 31 starts when the Lord saw Leah. Real quick timeline check. This was before Leah had any children. What does that mean? It means that Leah thought she needed to make children in order to be seen by Jacob. But what we see here is before she ever even made a child, God saw her. Before she made any of the things that she thought would make her matter in the world, before she did any of that work, she already mattered to God. And here is what Leah discovers. The blessing she thought she wanted was for Jacob to love her. But the blessing she actually needed was that God already did. And here's what happens. Watch this, because Leah's not done having kids. The first 3 kids, she had them because she said, surely if I have this kid, surely my husband will love me now. If I have this kid, surely he'll pay attention to me now. If I have this kid, surely I will have earned some affection by now. But she has a 4th kid. And in Genesis chapter 29, verse 35, the very next verse, she conceived again. And when she gave birth to a son, she said, this time I will what? This time I will praise the Lord, because this kid wasn't for Jacob. This work wasn't for him. This work wasn't for the blessing of another. This work was done because God has already seen me. God already loves me. God has already blessed me. You see, while our world and our culture's narrative would tell you that what you make makes you matter, God's narrative says you matter before you ever made anything. That you're making or producing or doing in this world does not equate to you mattering or being worth more. But it actually doesn't stop there. It actually goes one level deeper, and I want to show you really quick. So a new development in my life in the Jorgenson house in the last year is my daughter. She started going to school, and she loves school. She loves her teachers, loves her friends, but I think the thing she loves the most is also the thing I love the most. What she loves the most is bringing home some of her art projects that she works on at school and giving them to me and giving them to Erin. I actually have a collage of what I would consider some of her best work. Yeah, look at her. It's like the most uncertain gingerbread man you've ever seen. And I love this. Like, I love every single time my daughter brings one of these things home, it brings me so much joy. But I'll tell you what, I didn't start loving my daughter just because she started making stuff for me. I don't love her more when she brings home 2 projects instead of 1. I didn't start loving her more when she kind of learned how to color in the lines a little bit. Do you want to know when I started loving my daughter? Here it is. This is November 2020. Roughly around 8 or so months before she was born. I love that my daughter makes me stuff. But I didn't start loving her when she started making stuff. I started loving her from the minute I knew she existed. And here is what Scripture tells us. Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5. God says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." Psalm 139 says, "For you, God, created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am wonderfully made by you." You see, in a culture that begs you and I to see our value in proportion with what we produce, the narrative that God has been telling for literally thousands of years is one that says, you matter long before you make. But it goes one step deeper. The narrative of God actually says you mattered before you were even made. You matter because God made you. And so you don't need to work your way to worthiness because the one who is worthy already called you worthy before you even did any work. And so here's what I believe this means for you and me. It doesn't mean that the work that you and I do doesn't matter. It's not what it means. It doesn't mean we stop doing work in this world. It means that when we show up to that work, when you show up to your job, when you show up with your family or with your friends, when you show up to church, when we show up to any work we do in the world, here's what it means. It means we don't work to a place of blessing, we work from a place of blessing. It means that the blessing that actually matters is not one that you need to hustle your way to, it's one that's already been given to you. So I don't need to work my way to prove my value. I already know my value, and I work from that place. I don't need to work to prove to you that I'm worthy. My worthiness was taken care of before I was ever born, and so I can work and move and do and act in the world from that place. I just wonder if that little shift could actually change the way you see your entire life. Where you don't actually have to work to blessing or to love or to mattering, but you can actually show up anywhere knowing I'm already loved. I already matter. God has already called me valuable, and so I work from that place. I just wonder how that could change the way you show up every single place that you go. Like, what does the work of someone who already knows their worth look like? What is the dating relationship of someone who already is confident in their value look like? How do the conversations change? What do the prayers of someone who already knows they matter to God look like? What is the relationship to God of someone who already knows that they are loved? Because this is the God who literally gave his life on a cross for you. And it's from remembering that love. It's from remembering that I was worth dying for in God's eyes. Then I begin to move in the world. Then I begin to work in the world. I don't work to it, I work from it. I want to invite you, if you're in this room and you're able, I'd love to invite you to stand. Because we're going to worship right now. And we're going to worship to be reminded of everything that we just talked about. But before we do that, since this is largely a series about blessing, I thought it would be appropriate today to read a blessing over you all. A blessing to remind you of this truth. A blessing for you to carry with you in your mind and in your heart as you return to whatever the work that you do is in this world. And so I want to invite you to take a physical posture, if you're willing, of just placing your palms facing up. And all this says is I'm here to receive this blessing because I believe this is God's blessing for me. So Soul City Church, here is a blessing for your work. In all that you make, produce, and do in this world, may you work from a place of blessing rather than to a place of blessing. When you work to blessing, you're driven by what you can get for yourself. When you work from blessing, you're driven by what you can give to others. When you work to blessing, you may stand on your success, but you will fall by your failure. But when you work from blessing, you stand on the victory that God has already won, a God who never fails. When you work to blessing, you will only ever matter as much as you make. When you work from blessing, you matter long before you make anything. When you work to blessing, you will never be able to earn enough. Whereas when you work from blessing, you are reminded that God is Jehovah Jireh, the God who is enough, the God who has enough, and the God who calls you enough. So Soul City, when you make, when you produce, when you work, instead of working to a place of love, may you remember and may you know that you are always working from a place of love.